Sign it yourself then. That's what I whispered under my breath when the board chair said my position was no longer needed. I didn't shout, didn't cry, just boxed up 11 years of bulletproof systems, airtight contracts, and surgical audits like they were some old Christmas decorations nobody remembered putting up. Funny thing, nobody asked how the contracts got signed. They just assumed the ink appeared magically, like some compliance fairy waved a wand and the legal department farted out perfection. Desmond Vale walked in 6 weeks ago like he was auditioning for a reboot of Suits. Slick hair, discount charisma, and a smirk that said he'd Googled how to dominate women in leadership roles right before his first all-hands meeting. First words out of his mouth to me? Didn't know we had legacy bloat still on payroll. Legacy. Bloat. I'd written the goddamn infrastructure that kept his shiny little chair from sinking through a compliance hole the size of his ego. Still, I nodded. Not because I agreed, because I watched. Desmond thought silence meant surrender. He had no clue it was strategy. I stayed quiet while he killed the tracker I'd built from scratch. Said we didn't need custom crap when there were shiny dashboards with fun icons. He called my risk maps paranoid spaghetti. And when he handed a fresh intern my responsibilities, I didn't argue. Just started deleting my fingerprint from every system, quietly, surgically, like a ghost erasing its own shadow. Want more stories like this? Hit the like button and subscribe. It helps the team more than you think. And 97% of listeners forget to. Don't be one of them. By the time HR called me in, Desmond standing smug behind them like a kid who just tattled on the teacher, I already had 2 crates packed. I didn't even look at the severance folder. They thought I was stunned. I was calculating. Clause 9.3 of the merger agreement, the one nobody read because legal has it covered. I wrote it. I embedded it. I was the only authorized signatory for high-stakes vendor changes and compliance certifications above $50, which coincidentally was what the merger hinged on. Desmond erased me with a red expo marker on a whiteboard and thought it was over. What he didn't know? That red line was just a countdown, and the clock had already started ticking. I watched him do it, red marker squealing across the whiteboard like a pig being bled out. My name, Marissa Heller, Head of Compliance Infrastructure, 11 years, 15 audits, 0 failures. Crossed out in one motion by a man who couldn't spell attestation without spell check. Desmond Vale, CSO for 5 minutes and already convinced he was the second coming of corporate evolution. The boardroom was quiet, not silent, quiet. Like the kind of quiet you hear when everyone knows something wrong is happening, but nobody wants to look guilty by saying it out loud. He made a show of it too, stepped back, tilted his head, admired the board like he was painting a damn mural. Then, with that same wet-lipped confidence, he tapped the whiteboard with the marker cap and said, "We're streamlining redundancies." HR didn't even blink. Jane from HR, who once cried on my shoulder during her divorce, slid the severance packet across the table like it was a Starbucks receipt. "This is just protocol," she muttered, not meeting my eyes. I nodded. Not for her sake, for mine. I didn't need a goodbye party. I needed them to forget just how much I had touched. I walked to my desk and opened the bottom drawer. 2 crates, prepped weeks ago. One held personal things, framed photo of my sister, a rubber band ball I'd made during quarterly audits, a coffee mug that said, "Document everything, especially idiots." The second crate was for the decoys, hard copy compliance binders labeled with gibberish, printed versions of the deprecated 2016 policies, a broken badge swiper that still looked official. Just enough to make it seem like I took everything. When I left the real system encrypted behind 3 layers of locked access no one even knew existed. As I walked out, Desmond didn't even look up from his phone. I bet he was texting the intern he'd installed in my seat. Travis or Tyler or some other neckbeard with a bachelor's in buzzwords. Legacy bloat neutralized, maybe. I imagine that's how he framed it. No protests, no speeches. Just steps down the hallway, my heels clicking like a metronome, counting down to a silence they hadn't earned. What Desmond didn't know, what none of them knew, was that crossing out my name wasn't the end. It was the trigger. It started small, like most catastrophic failures do. Someone in legal pinged the clause tracker and got a 5 undo error. They assumed it was IT. Maybe the migration hadn't finished. Maybe the system just needed a reboot. But rebooting didn't help. Restarting the server instance? Nothing. Admin override? Access denied. They called Travis, Desmond's golden retriever with a keyboard. He shrugged and said, "We moved everything to the cloud." Except they hadn't. Not the part that mattered. Clause Tracker wasn't just a database. It was a fortress. I'd built it on custom architecture for a reason. Redundancy kills speed, but speed kills clarity. And when you're dealing with compliance terms that can tank an 8-figure deal if misfiled, clarity's worth its weight in signatures. Clause 9.3, buried on page 247 of the merger contract, required a named signatory for all third-party vendor retention tied to federal compliance. Guess who the named signatory was? Guess who wrote the clause? Desmond didn't know. Not yet. He strutted through the office like a rooster in a chicken nugget factory, chest puffed up from finally cutting overhead. The team even clapped in that weird, hesitant way people do when they're scared to be the only one sitting still. He gave some speech about unlocking agile potential and redefining legacy roles while sipping sparkling water like it was champagne. Meanwhile, emails started bouncing. Vendor portals locked. Procurement deadlines turned to red banners with countdowns. People started asking questions, quietly, at first. Hey, has anyone seen the June compliance summary? Is the SOC2 attestation link working for you? Why are our vendor SLA thresholds showing as expired? Each question met with blank stares or brittle smiles. Travis insisted everything was syncing just fine. Desmond waved it off. Growing pains. But by noon, legal was sweating bullets and someone from risk management called to ask, very politely, why 3 core vendors had initiated penalty clauses due to missing renewal confirmation. By 1 Gus p.m., the CTO's assistant forwarded a note. Desmond, Clause 9.3 requires a compliance signature for this morning's vendor batch. Who signed? The answer, of course, was no one, because the only one who could sign had left the building with 2 crates and a mug that said, "Document everything," including, apparently, their downfall. Desmond still hadn't realized, but everyone else had started to. You could feel it, static in the air, uncertainty crawling through Slack channels like a virus. The system had stopped responding. And I was already halfway through my 3rd latte, sitting at home, watching the real-time dashboard I hadn't told anyone existed. Sometimes the best revenge is silence so loud it echoes through their quarterly report. It was 2:38 p.m. when it finally clicked. Corporate counsel, David Greer, the kind of guy who still wore cufflinks to Zoom calls, was flipping through the contract binder like it owed him money. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple as he muttered, "Where's the replacement language? Who signed off on this clause?" Nobody answered, because nobody could. Clause 9.3 stared back at them like a loaded gun. Final review of any merger impacting vendor engagement must be signed by the named compliance officer of record. No proxy, no substitute, no exceptions. And right below it, in my own language David himself had approved 18 months ago, was a single name. Marissa Heller. Not a title, not a department, a person. Me. There was a clause for replacing a CEO, a clause for reassigning fiduciary duties, even a clause detailing emergency jurisdiction in the event of company dissolution. But no clause for replacing me. I made sure of that. Desmond was leaning back in a leather chair, texting, probably wondering which sushi spot he'd hit after his big win today. He hadn't looked up once during the meeting. Didn't see David's face lose all its color. Didn't hear the shaky inhale before David stood, fast, like he'd been electrocuted, and hit the edge of the table. The full glass pitcher of lemon water toppled and smashed, spraying ice and sliced citrus across the polished oak and onto the patent leather shoes of 2 senior board members. That's when Desmond finally looked up. What the hell? David didn't answer right away. He just stared at the broken glass like it held the answer. Then flatly, Clause 9.3 requires Marissa's signature by 4 p.m. today. Silence. The kind that eats the room. The M&A attorney from the seller's side blinked. You fired the only authorized signatory? Desmond stammered. She was redundant. She was the clause. David snapped. Someone cursed under their breath. One of the investor reps dropped their pen. Jane from HR was already crying in the hallway again. Nobody moved. There were 46 minutes left. No backups, no overrides, no digital signature automation. I'd built it that way on purpose. Because trust isn't a checkbox, it's a chain of custody. And that chain ended with me. Desmond stood now, chest rising like he was about to talk his way out of it. But there was nothing left to say. The bluff had collapsed. The game board was clear. All that remained was a room full of suits, the sharp citrus sting of spilled lemon water, and a single missing signature that had already changed everything. And me? I was still silent, still watching. By 3:01 p.m., the email landed like a funeral bell. Subject line, signature required to close by 4 p.m. or contract void. Sender, Richard L. Phelps, Esquire, M&A Counsel, Carrington and Holt, LLP, Tone. Sharp, final, non-negotiable. Legal tried spinning it first. Surely we can get an extension. No, Phelps replied, 1 minute later. Your firm's own clause 9.3 bars continuance without the named officer. That clause wasn't ours. It was yours. The message was crystal clear. No Marissa, no merger. Every eye in the room went wide, except Desmond's. He was still trying to posture, arms crossed, saying things like, "We have authority via executive override," which would have been cute if it weren't so legally bankrupt. Executive override doesn't mean jack when the binding document says named signatory only. And right now, that name was busy ignoring 6 missed calls, 3 frantic texts from HR, and 1 pitiful LinkedIn DM from Travis that simply read, "Hey, can we talk?" I wasn't picking up. The clock became an enemy, each tick louder than the last. 3:05, 3:10, 3:13. Nobody looked at Desmond anymore. He wasn't the center of gravity. Panic was. The kind of panic that makes people forget to blink, forget to sip their cold coffee, forget to pretend everything's fine. The board chair, who hadn't said a word since the water pitcher incident, finally leaned in and asked the room, "Does anyone know where she is?" Jane from HR murmured something about last seen with 2 crates. The CIO admitted I deleted my Slack workspace. Someone in legal tried to pull up my emergency contact, but all they had was an old office landline that now rerouted to an empty desk. Someone suggested sending a company car to my apartment. They didn't realize I'd moved out 2 weeks earlier. The seller's lawyer followed up at 3:17. Final reminder, if we don't receive an executed signature page by 4 p.m. Eastern, the deal is off. Termination fees apply. Millions in sunk cost, months of negotiation, gone, all hinging on a single name. Mine. Desmond finally broke. Voice shaking, he barked, "Just call her again. Offer something, anything." Someone did. The phone rang twice. Then voicemail. The room held its breath. I wasn't just gone. I was irreplaceable. And for the first time, they all knew it. I answered on the 5th ring. Not because I was feeling generous, but because I knew exactly what time it was, and what that silence in their boardroom must have felt like. I imagined Desmond pacing like a caged raccoon in a conference room filled with people too afraid to make eye contact. The kind of silence that smells like fear and citrus. "Marissa, thank God," someone blurted. I didn't respond. "Look," Jane from HR began, her voice all sugar and desperation. "We need your sign-off on clause 9.3 before 4. There's been a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. That's what they were calling it now. I let that word dangle like a corpse in the wind, then said, evenly, "Put Desmond on the line." A few fumbling seconds, muffled whispers, then his voice came on, coded in that hollow confidence you hear when a man finally understands gravity. "Marissa, I think we both know this isn't the time for—" "Shut up, Desmond," I said. Calm, professional, lethal. He did. "I want 3 things," I continued. "New title, Executive Director of Compliance Infrastructure, reporting directly to the board. Not you, not the COO, the board." Silence. 2, I said. "Full indemnity, retroactive to the date of my termination. That includes all decisions made in my absence. Vendor stalls, missed signatures, system tampering, everything. If legal touches it, I'm covered." 3? 3, I said, pausing just long enough to let it sting. "A signed letter from you admitting that my removal was an error in judgment, and that you failed to understand the operational risks involved." I could hear him swallow. Loud, slow, dry. You'll send all of that by 3:45, signed, scanned, no edits. Then, and only then, I'll log into the vault and authorize the signature. Someone in the room must have made a face because I caught the faintest whisper over the speaker. She has a vault? Desmond didn't argue. Not now. He asked one thing. Do you really need the letter? I smiled. You needed my name. I need yours. Written, in ink. Owning the moment you erased mine. Then I hung up. This wasn't revenge. This was policy. Clean, efficient, enforceable. And I knew exactly what they'd pay, because I was the one who wrote the cost into the contract. By 4:12, the digital signature was logged. The system I'd built, which until that moment they had no clue still responded only to me, blinked green and unlocked the entire vendor renewal packet in under 6 seconds. Clause 9.3 was satisfied. The deal closed. Millions preserved. Everyone exhaled like survivors pulled from the rubble of their own negligence. I didn't go back to my old desk. That space belonged to a ghost now. Instead, I walked straight past legal, past HR's wide-eyed stares, past the war zone of overturned chairs and lemon water streaks, and toward the glass-walled office at the end of the hall. Desmond's office. Correction. Formerly Desmond's. No one stopped me. No one dared. Inside, someone had already boxed his things. A monitor cable still dangled from the edge of the desk. One of his overpriced fountain pens lay abandoned near the edge, uncapped, bleeding blue onto the surface like a slow confession. His nameplate was gone. In its place, a sticky note. Yellow, crooked, written in someone's rushed Sharpie scrawl, clause 9.3. I smiled, just barely. The kind you let slip when justice is quiet and nobody claps. When you don't need a parade because the truth already marched through the room and flattened every ego in its path. Outside the glass, people pretended not to stare. One junior exec snapped back to his screen so fast he nearly knocked over his coffee. I didn't mind. Let them watch. Let them wonder. I opened the laptop. My credentials, Marissa Heller, Executive Director, Compliance Infrastructure, had already been updated in the system. My access? Full. No more permissions to request. No more ask it. No more waiting on anyone. Desmond had been officially excused from the organization according to a company-wide email that arrived at 4:15. No signature, no tribute. Just one sentence and a timestamp. No one replied to it. No one needed to. The office was quiet now, not fearful, respectful. Like the stillness that follows a courtroom verdict no one dared predict, but everyone secretly knew was coming. Outside my new window, the skyline didn't look different, but everything else had shifted. Sometimes you don't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes you just need to sign. The first thing I did was dismantle everything I had once built, not out of spite, out of precision. Clause Tracker 2.0 was rebuilt within a week, this time mirrored across 3 redundant backups and encrypted with a biometric override tied to a rotating key schedule. Every signature required co-authentication. Every amendment was time-stamped, archived, and audit-logged in real time. Not even I could sign alone anymore. That wasn't humility. That was control. True control doesn't hoard power. It disperses it so no one can burn the system down just to feel important. I assigned protocols, automated risk checkpoints, and installed a digital ledger that pinged legal, risk, and vendor ops every time Desmond's name popped up in archived systems, just so no one could sweep his fingerprints under a rug and rewrite history. There was no incident. There was a documented collapse, and the documentation was bulletproof. People moved differently now, quieter, sharper. The interns stopped using slang in emails. IT stopped mocking legacy code. Even Jane from HR began reading contracts instead of skimming them for buzzwords. Something had shifted, not just structurally, but spiritually. One afternoon, during onboarding for a new director, someone asked me point blank, "Why didn't you fight back? Why not go to the board when you were pushed out?" I looked at them for a long second, then said, "I didn't need to." Pause. I drafted the clause. It landed like thunder in a quiet field, not loud, Not fast, just final. I wasn't here to prove anything anymore. I didn't need applause or apologies. The war was over before they ever realized it had started, and I had won by design, before the whiteboard, before the crates, before the glass shattered. I'd written myself into the bloodstream of the company, not with ego, but with foresight, not for glory, for protection. And now the very claws that erased me had resurrected me with more authority than I ever had before. So no, I didn't fight. I didn't raise my voice. I wrote the system. And when the system broke, I watched it call my name. The board met 2 weeks after the dust settled. Formal review, internal damage assessment, compliance integrity debrief, all the buzzwords executives use when they're trying to wrap words around a bullet they didn't see coming. The CEO opened the floor with a single sentence. Let's get clarity on what happened and who prevented total collapse. That was it. No legalese, no lawyerly preamble, just one question echoed across the table, heavy as judgment. Who stopped the collapse? Nobody hesitated. One by one, they turned. Every hand pointed in my direction. No one fumbled. No one looked unsure. For once, the truth wasn't hiding behind jargon or titles. They said my name out loud. Marissa Heller, with the kind of reverence people reserve for those who speak fluently in firewalls and foresight. They knew the truth now. I hadn't just signed contracts. I'd threaded structure through the bones of the company. I'd stitched risk and rescue into the fine print. And when that system buckled, I hadn't retaliated. I'd simply waited. The new chair, an older woman with zero tolerance for theater, flipped through the report folder and traced the audit trail with one manicured finger. Every mitigation ticked back to my policy, every clause linked to my signature, every preserved dollar, delayed penalty, and reversed escalation pointed to the same thing. One name. On every page. Mine. Back in my office, the one that had belonged to a man who thought legacy was something you delete with a red marker, I replaced the sticky note with something heavier. It's a plaque now. Black steel, clean serif lettering. Sign nothing you're not willing to own. Simple, sharp, final. People stop and read it when they walk past. Some nod, some wince. But the point is made. I didn't fight them. I didn't beg. I wrote the clause. And when the time came, I signed.